Romans chapter 15. It's a good thing I went to 2 services. Where would all these people fit in the 2 services? Here we go. Paul writing to the church at Rome. Now I am on my way to Jerusalem in service of the Lord's people there. For Macedonia and Achaia, that's churches in Greece and Asia Minor, were pleased to give an offering for the Lord's people, the poor in Jerusalem. They were pleased to do it, and indeed they owe it to them. For if the Gentiles have shared in the Jews' spiritual blessings, they owe it to the Jews to share with them their material blessings. It's a very strong verse. So after I've completed this task and have made sure that I have received this fruit, I'm going to go to Spain and visit you on the way. I know that when I come to you, I will come in the full measure of the blessing of Christ. And this, Trinity Church, is God's word. 5 years ago in 2018, in a time before COVID, I took a missions trip to Vietnam. I was going there. When you go to Vietnam, you can't go really in large groups and do ministry because outside Westerners preaching the gospel in a communist country is not allowed. The church has gotten a little bit more acceptable there in the last 3 or 4 years, but again, us going and preaching, you have to do it underground, hidden, and do those things. So you can only go in like groups of 2, 3, or 4 if you're doing this kind of thing. So I was traveling to go to speak at a pastor's conference in Hanoi, which is the North Vietnamese area, and I was speaking to 200 pastors from the Indian tribes there in central Vietnam and from the pastors from the communist area of North Vietnam that they were training. And so I was taking with me a young adult was on our staff. He was our creative video director, graphics, Alec Phelps. And so on our layover, we were going to have to lay over in Tokyo because it's about a 15-hour flight to Tokyo, then like an 8-hour flight to Hanoi. And when we got ready to leave Dallas, we didn't leave. We sat there. You know, they deplaned us. We sat in the area for a while. They changed terminals on us. 8 hours later, we finally got on our plane and we headed for Tokyo. When we get to Tokyo, we had missed our connection with Hanoi for several hours. So it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We have this little tiny hotel room that there's 2 beds kind of crammed together. And I mean, it's really small for a young adult guy and an old guy being in the same room. It was a little uncomfortable. So we said, we can't sit here, you know, even though we're tired. Let's go out. Let's experience Japan. We've never been there. Let's go to Tokyo and just see what it's like. Shopping district, you know, restaurants, around a really cool spot. Let's go do that. Went downstairs. Got downstairs, we've discovered that the language, the characters aren't letters. The taxi driver didn't speak English. Nobody down at the desk, hardly none of them really spoke English. And so we're showing him our spot. And he's nodding his head. You know, he shows us what it would be in the yen. I make the little money translation in my head. And okay, off we go. We get to this area in downtown Tokyo. We get out. I look around. I go, Alec. I go, this doesn't look like what we're seeing on the internet, because this is like really dark. It's like sake bars lining these streets, and it doesn't look like a tourist area. Looks like South Oak Cliff, kind of. I don't know, and we turned around, and our taxi driver is gone. And so I, being wise and have seasoned in years, let's get another taxi guy and get out of here. Alec, being young and adventuresome, said, No, this is great. We'll get to feel what it's really like. He goes, I really want to film. He had his camera. I want to document where all this is. And so even though I'm his boss, we did what he wanted because I gave in to peer pressure. But one note, because we were traveling to a communist country in Vietnam, and because what we were doing for the conference required funds, and wiring it, the Vietnamese, unless you run it through a certain route, it's really complicated. They will confiscate a number of resources. So we were taking I had $10,000 cash down my shirt in a pouch under there. And I couldn't leave it in the hotel room because we didn't have a safe in the hotel room. So I had it with me. But we decided. So he starts filming and doing different things, and I'm getting more fearful. I'm clutching my chest by the moment. And then I look around, and Alec is just gone. I don't know, he went down some side alley, and I'm alone by myself on a street, a couple of bars on both sides. And I look up, and there are 3 young adult Japanese To me, they look like sure drug dealers. They're coming right at me. There probably hasn't been a Westerner American in this part of Tokyo in the entire history of Tokyo. And I had two thoughts. The first thought was, I'm going to die. The second thought was, no offering is worth my life. And I'm ready just to rip it off and just throw it at their feet and run. You see, when we talk about offering, in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, it's called a gift. In the New Testament, it's the word prospero from the Greek, which means to bring to. So offering this morning, that's the theme of what we're talking about. When Paul writes in Romans chapter 15, he's talking about, he calls it a contribution to describe the offering that he plans on bringing to Jerusalem. And this is an offering that's really significant, probably the most significant offering you'll read about in the New Testament. Because Paul will refer to this offering a number of times throughout his writings, or when Luke is writing in the book of Acts, he refers to it. In Acts 24, Luke calls this offering that Paul was bringing a gift. In 1 Corinthians 16, Paul writing to the church at Corinth, he describes it as a sum of money. In 2 Corinthians 8, whenever I read that, I'm thinking to myself, how much money was Paul actually taking? I mean, $100,000? I mean, I don't know, but a sum of money. And in 2 Corinthians 8, Paul calls it an act of grace. And when you think of the book of Acts, what comes to your mind? The power of the Holy Spirit, the baptism of tongues of fire falling on the people of the day of Pentecost, tongues, prophecies, miracles, Peter's preaching on the day of Pentecost, a great sermon, the church being added to, Stephen's stoning, and God standing up and cheering on his martyrdom in that moment, Paul's conversion, their escapes from prison, everything that occurs. That's what comes to your mind in the book of Acts. But few people realize that the final third, the last 9 chapters of the book of Acts, are all about Paul trying to take this offering that's described in Romans to the church in Jerusalem. You see, on his first missionary journey, him and Barnabas went out and they spread the gospel. They built churches. On his second missionary journey, he takes Silas, because him and Barnabas had a church split over John Mark, and they go out and they spread the gospel and build churches in other places. On his third missionary journey, Paul goes back to the churches that he had established on his first 2, and he's collecting an offering from each of these churches. And he's taking an offering because he's going to take it back to Jerusalem. And he starts toward Jerusalem after taking an offering from all these churches in Europe and Asia Minor, and he stops in the city of Corinth. Actually, in January of next year, the Lord willing, I will be in Corinth when we do the footsteps of Paul. He stops and he begins to write, and he writes the letter to the church at Rome, the book of Romans as we know it today. And it is a powerful book. It's the great defense of the gospel. I mean, Romans 5:1, we have been justified by faith. Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death and the gift of God is eternal life. Romans 8:28, we know that all things work together for the good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Romans 10:9 and 10, if you believe, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, if you believe in your heart that God raised him, you'll be saved. I mean, all these things we have that Paul wrote. But you know what he also wrote about? He wrote about an offering. He spends a large part of Romans 15 talking about this gift. I'm on my way to Spain. I'm going to visit you in Rome. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm taking an offering to Jerusalem. I survived the bars of the streets of Tokyo. The 3 young adult guys, they walked right by me and didn't even pay me any mind, any attention. We get on our plane the next day. We head down to Hanoi. We get there. I run into our missionary. And I said, Jason, I take off my thing. I said, here, take this, get it off my hands. Because if I lose it, then I have to pay it all back. And God did something for me on that trip. I've been on a lot of mission trips, probably 30 to 35 in my life. Season of my life when I was over the school, our Christian school, and also youth pastor, I did 2 to 3 mission trips a year to foreign places. And so when we go to Vietnam, This is the pastor, Pastor Doe. He built the entire, all the wood flooring, you see everything, he did all that. And then you go to the second place. This is the church. They're in neighborhoods because churches technically are illegal, like buildings in most of North Vietnam. And so it's in a house. It's 3 or 4 stories up. This is Pastor Doe's house, room that he stays in, and that's all of his belongings. He makes $30 a month. I mean, even today, I mean, he's been doing this. I mean, he's got a bigger church now, but I mean, just what they live and survive on. And God spoke to me in crazy ways on this trip. I truly believe, Lennon, I don't think you can be saved if you don't take a mission trip once a year. Because it recalibrates the blessings that we have here in the United States of America, no matter how poor sometimes we think we are, compared to what the people in other places around this world are going through and living with. Because this freedom to do this, we don't have. Many places don't have this freedom. And then also the blessings financially that we have is unparalleled in world's history. So on this trip, I got back. My pastor's wife, Pastor Becky from the main campus, she had this, our missions heart comes from her. And so she had this crazy idea that she was going to do this thing called Project 5000. Because she was raised, her father was a teen challenge director, and so they were always like just so reliant on offerings and waiting for checks. And so she wanted to be someone that, for special projects, they could give, large amounts to. So she's going to find 200 people that could give $5,000 each, and that way every year she would have like $1 million to do big special projects with. And since I'm involved in administrating missions, I was setting up the first meeting and all the people that were coming. I was talking to my boss, Pastor Hennessy, and I said, Pastor, everything's set up. I said, do you want me to come to the Project 5000 meeting? And he looked at me and he says, are you going to give $5,000? Well, I'm thinking in my mind, no, I'm just a poor staff member. I'm administrating, this thing. My daughter's getting married in 2 months, and my son is graduating from SAGU, and you know how expensive SAGU is, and the thing is going to be debt free, and I don't want to leave, blah, blah, blah. And in my mind, and I didn't really respond to him. I just walked away because he was kind of kidding, kind of. And so that night, I'm laying in my bed, and I just couldn't get away from the Project 5000 thing. And Michelle and I kind of talked about it, and okay, let's do this. So we agreed to do it. Next Sunday, being where we are, I'm still writing checks at my age, and so I'm writing a check, and I am not following 2 Corinthians 9:7. I am not a cheerful giver. I'm griping. I'm complaining. I don't have this. My daughter's not going to have cake. She's not going to have photography at her wedding. I'm going to have to use my iPhone to do photos for her wedding pictures. I mean, David's going to have these debt for his school. All these things. I'm just griping. I drop it in, and I kind of got over it. Okay. A couple of weeks later, I have a friend call me. Hey, and I have a sister-in-law. She's got a wedding. They're coming. It's her second marriage. Could you meet with her and then do the wedding? And I'm close to this friend. I said, yes, I will do it. We had dinner with that couple that night, kind of did some counseling there. Next morning, we do the wedding at the hotel down in their open area, courtyard area. It's a 10-minute wedding. Pastors, look, generally, no pastor is ever super excited to do your wedding. I mean, we love the ones we do weddings for. Generally, we know them, we love them deeply. But the mother-in-law, the bride, the mother, the wedding coordinator, they clash. It's a wedding rehearsal. It's a wedding rehearsal dinner. It's a wedding. It's a reception. It's all the things that go with it. It's in the counseling. It's 24 to 36 hours worth of work, and you get $100, $200. $300. I'd be better off going to McDonald's and work for a couple of days. You only do it as an act and a labor of love. And all the pastors in the room are secretly like nodding right now. But I did it. And a couple weeks later, I'm at the house after the wedding. Oh yeah, here's the check. I guess he said he was going to send me a check, for the wedding, and opened it up. It's $5,000. Now that's more money than all the weddings I've ever done in my entire, I think I've done 70 something of them. It's just, and at least probably a third of those because they were youth to young adult that I youth pastored, I got nothing for other than just the Lord in heaven somewhere. And just that realization that when the Lord speaks, when it comes to the missions, when it comes to giving and the generosity and what he will provide. He didn't give me a penny more. He didn't give me a penny less. He gave me exactly what I put into that offering. And so as Paul is writing this letter to Rome, I've never forgotten that, because what was on Paul's mind, this offering, this gift, this contribution for the church in Jerusalem, everything from Acts 20 to Acts 28 is a result of saying, I'm going to take this offering to Jerusalem. Anything you read about happening, all is because of this offering. So, a couple of things in the next, did they have to eat by 12? Is that the rule here in the second service? That's a great thing about being down here. Like, we're going to 1, and it's in the Cedar Hill campus. We started 11, we're going to 1. So I can be out whenever time I want and go eat lunch. This is great. There's a couple of things, though, I want to share with you about this offering. And I think it applies to us in our time. The first thing is this: there was a need. See, Paul's going to get arrested in Jerusalem as he's taking the offering a few chapters later in the book of Acts. And because he's going to get arrested, he's going to get put on trial. Several trials. In Acts 24:17, he's making a defense at his trial. He's arguing, like, if you go to Jerusalem, Israel, which, man, that whole war thing has really put our trip at risk. You will go up from Jerusalem up the Mediterranean Sea on the first day of your tour. You'll go to Caesarea by the sea, where they've excavated, uncovered archaeological stuff of the Roman city of Caesarea by the sea. And you can go into the place where Paul, you can stand, because they have an inscription there back from that time period of the person in charge, of where Paul actually stood in the great court and made his defense in this moment in Romans 24. And he says this before Felix. Acts 24:17, after an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem to bring my people gifts for the poor. See, a significant number of Jewish Christians in Jerusalem were struggling financially because they had made the conversion over to faith. They were cut off from the Jewish believers of the old covenant. And so because they stepped out and accepted Christ as their personal Savior, because they confessed that He was Lord and they believed that He was raised from the dead, they did not have the funds. And Paul says, because they are taking this step of faith, I'm going to help them out. Can I tell you, in places around the world, there are people who are making life and death decisions to follow Christ. And whatever we sow a seed in missions, we're saying we know there is a need. You see Drew and Haley on the screen? We support 134 missionaries from Trinity Church. We give those missionaries anywhere from $100 to $500 a month. It's $33,000 a month that goes out of our church account to 134 missionaries around the world every single month. If we don't do it, and other churches don't partner to do it, and other individuals don't partner, the gospel can't go to these places for people that are making life and death decisions. See, there was a need. When I look around this area, this church, Waxahachie, there is a need. You have Marvin Elementary School. You have the Turner Pre-K that you're giving into. You have from 2 blocks over, as you go to school at Sagu, as you live and work in this community, 2 blocks from this church is one of the poorest economic areas in all of Dallas-Fort Worth area. There's a need. People are struggling, and you can step into it locally and impact the need with your giving. You can step into it worldwide as we give to things beyond ourselves, to places like Uganda. I went last August to Uganda, where those missionaries are building a Disneyland park in the poorest place, where they suffered civil war for 20 years, where they would kidnap children and teenagers, force them to be soldiers and sex slaves. A whole generation of young people are now 35, 40 years old that if they survive, they've lived through that. They have nothing. Yet there's missionaries on the ground doing work there that no one else will do around this world. That's what we do. There is a need, and it's everywhere we look. And if you don't spirit lens, I think it was like last Tuesday, Halloween, we did on the main campus, we did the Light the Night event. Used to be called Rock the Pumpkin, used to be called Hallelujah Night, the alternative to Halloween for children. And all three of my kids are grown. They all went to SAGU, graduated from SAGU, and they were there. My grandson was there. My son-in-law was there. And I was just looking at Legacy Park and I had a flashback when I was 16 years old, a lifetime ago, old. I walked onto that campus at a college university in a classroom. There was 50 people going to church at Trinity Church. It ministered to me in a classroom. It ministered to me when they moved into a building that held about 300 people. It ministered to me when I moved into a building that held 2,000 people, but it was a temporary worship center. As a young adult, as a young married couple, for the last 45 years, and I'm looking at all the things that are there, the 75 acres, all the buildings that are there, and I began to calculate just in my head. I think I've given roughly over $300,000 to missions and to building projects at Trinity Church. And Paul's words here in Romans 15 came back to me because I was working on this sermon. He says, Gentiles who shared in the Jews' spiritual blessings owed it to the Jews to share in the material blessings. And see, my local church has been there for me my entire life. It's been there for me in the goods and the bads, in the seasons of time, the place where I planted and I set down roots. And I feel like I owe it to my church to then take my material blessings and then pour it back into their missions vision and the vision they have for the kingdom of God around the world. And I love being a part of something that's bigger than myself because there is a need. Paul could have just said, that's Jerusalem. That's not my problem. But he didn't. And the second thing about it, not just that there was a need, there was a spirit command, or I kind of like Lennon, we kind of talked about between services, there was a spirit obligation here. An obligation, you know what that means? Look what Paul says again when he's spending 3 months in Corinth and he's writing the book of Romans, and he from the city of Miletus, he calls the Ephesian elders to come and meet with him because he's about to go to Jerusalem. He's only a few miles away. And he says this in Acts 20:22. And now compelled by the Spirit, I'm going to Jerusalem, not knowing what's going to happen to me there. Compelled is to be forced. Compelled is to be overpowered. When the Ephesian elders get there, one of the prophets, Agabus, takes off Paul's belt and he ties his own hands and his feet. And he says, the Jewish leaders are going to hand you over to the Romans, Paul. But Paul says it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm going to go to prison. It doesn't matter what the Romans or the Jewish people do to me because the Spirit is forcing me, He's obligating me to take this offering, and I've got to bring it by the day of Pentecost. See, nothing could stop him from this assignment. And so he's going to go into Jerusalem, and as soon as he goes into Jerusalem, he's arrested. He's put on trial before the Jewish Sanhedrin. There's a plot to kill him, and he has to escape with the Roman soldiers to Caesarea by the sea. There's a trial before Felix. There's 2 years in prison in Caesarea. There's a trial before Festus and King Agrippa. He's sent to Rome for trial. Then there's a storm and a shipwreck and snakes, and he spends 2 years in a Roman prison, and then he's executed. All because he took an offering. Because the Spirit compelled him. Right before he dies, I fought the good fight. I've kept the faith. I finished the race. So 15 years ago, I came down to SAGU in August. I was enrolling my oldest son in college. You know, he was not super out front in all of his planning, and so he didn't get the right dorm that he wanted. And so there was another dorm there that was newer that he wanted. I think it was Teeter. Was it Teeter, Michelle? I think he wanted in. I can't remember the name. At the time, it was the best one. I don't know what it is now. But And so I go, well, I'll just go meet with the dorm director. So I met with the dorm director and say, is there any way, I'm a powerful influence pastor, at this local church in Dallas, any way you get my son into your dorm because he's really heartbroken. Then he has to, I think it was Collins or whatever he got put in. I don't know. I was in Davis, where I don't think Davis exists anymore, but back in my day. But at least then you could climb out the windows, and so the dorm people couldn't catch you if you got caught. Oh, never mind. Don't. And so we start talking, and there's just no room. I said, there's no. He goes, no. And so we start talking to each other a little bit, and he said, I'm not doing this very long. This is my last year, so I'm getting ready to leave. I'm a missionary associate. I'm going with this group of people. We're all going to South Vietnam, and we're going to blah, blah, blah. We're going to do all these kind of things. And it hit me. I'm the missions kind of coordinator at Trinity. This guy's going to the mission field. I go, we'd love to possibly support you, but I'll have to go back and kind of check and see or whatever, find out if we can. So the next day, after I get back, he calls me and he goes, hey, Tim, he goes, I've got a spot for your son. I said, funny you say that. We can support you to go to the... Did I bribe him to get my kid in? Probably. I don't know. Your missions dollars at work. I kind of forgot about it. He's one of $100 a month at the time, one of 100, and he's just an associate. 4 years later, I'm in Waxahachie, Sagu at the district missions banquet. We're getting some award. Becky's there, our pastor's wife. My wife's there, Michelle. This guy gets up. His name's Jason. And he starts sharing his story, how he was in South Vietnam and just training, and God had now called him after his first term to North Vietnam, where we don't have an Assembly of God missionary. We don't have anybody that knows how to speak the Vietnamese language. You don't have anybody that will even willing to drive a vehicle like in North Vietnam, because you don't realize how unsafe it is in these areas. I mean, and all the district areas of that region said you can't do it. But he got a miracle visa, work visa, where a communist high-level party leader gave him a job and an office that he didn't actually have to do any work at, so he could do all the missions work, because secretly the communist leader was a spirit-filled Pentecostal thing. And so he still has that same job today that he doesn't do any work in, but he is doing those things. And so he's sharing all this and talking about his wife and what she had gone through in the attack, in different realms. And the Lord just said, an obligation, something compelled inside of me at the table, like, we need to help this guy. I didn't know who he was. I looked at Becky, and Becky, who really leads she goes, yes. I walked up to him after it finished. And he goes, Tim, it's so good to see you again. Thanks you for supporting us in Vietnam. Oh yeah, this is my kid's ex-dorm guy. And I looked at Jason, and I said, Jason, we're going to do something great together. The Lord has spoken that our church, 11 years later from that meeting in that banquet, as part Trinity Church has provided the resources for 7 churches at $30,000 a piece. Those house churches you saw right there. Trinity Church has purchased land, $300,000 land, so that another ministry, missions, could build a $2.5 million, and what the churches in Vietnam has sacrificed as well, a $2.5 million piece of property, 5 stories, office building, downtown Hanoi, a church that holds 500, training pastors. Cannot be done. You can't build a church in Hanoi, Vietnam. But that's because it was an obligation. What if I'd ignored that? What if my pastor's wife had said no? What if the people that bought into that had not? What would happen if we just decided not to listen to the Spirit's command? See, there was a need. Paul's going to take an offering. But there's a need because the Spirit told him to, compelled him. And then finally, worship team, as you'll come. There was a goal. There was an actual goal. Paul said, Acts 20:24, I consider my life worth nothing to me. My only aim is to finish the race and complete the task the Lord has given me. But again, what's the context? What's the task? The task is I'm going to take this offering to Rome or to Jerusalem by the day of Pentecost. I'm willing to complete this task. And I know if I'm Paul, it's the last thing he wants to do as a free Roman citizen is to risk his freedom and his life for a missions offering. But he had a goal. See, Trinity Church, we have a goal. Last year, we gave $1.3 million to missions as a Trinity Church. This year, our goal is $1.5 million to missions. That's our goal. On Thanksgiving, across all of our campuses, we have a goal for our one-day offering in which we do big projects out of the one-day offering. Our goal is to raise $100,000 on November 26th, 2 weeks from today. Michelle and I have already set aside our one day's wage, what we make one day a year, to give as that offering. And we have a goal. Trinity Church is 47 years old. In August of 2026, it'll be 50. Building buildings, purchasing campuses and property, and then paying off all of that. We've gone $34 million in debt in the last 15 years, starting in 2007. As we stand today, right today, we're $4.2 million in debt. We've paid off $30 million. Our goal is on August, third week of August, which is the start anniversary of the church, 2020, we pay off that $4.2 million and burn the mortgage. And debt-free, how much more can we do into the vision of Fair Park and Waxahachie and Bishop Arts and Cedar Hill and other places where God calls us, not only to our missionaries around the world. My goal is a family. And we have a goal for this particular one, for the faith promise. Really not even a goal, it's what we're going to do. But as a family, as a whole, our goal is I want to give 10% above my tithe to missions in 2023-24. What's your goal? What's the church's goal? Is God speaking to you individually? 20 years ago, it's weird, life's weird. I was youth pastor. I was nearing the end of a decade run. And our youth group was very generous in Speed the Light, which is Assembly of God, teenage, young adult missions. Our kids were amazing. And so because our kids were amazing, I got to sometimes go speak and do missions stuff to teenagers and youth groups for the district in North Texas. So in that season, I got a sermon called The Greatest Givers, and it was about the widow's mite, woman giving all that she had, the 2 coins, about the woman, alabaster jar, breaking it open, a year of her salary, she just poured out at Jesus' feet, just throwing it away. And then the offering of David's men, when he's in the cave at Adullam, the Philistines control Bethlehem. David's thinking of his childhood and his teenage years and his young adult years. He says, man, if I just had water from the well at Bethlehem. You wonder why places like In-N-Out Burger from California and Portillo's, the hot dog place from Chicago that's starting to open up in Dallas, why when they open there's like thousands of people going there? Because all the people from those states remember and they want to go relive those moments. So David wants to relive the water moment. So as men, without David, no, they break through the enemy lines, the Philistines, they get to the well, they dig out water, they fight back through the lines, they get to David back in the cave, and they say, here's the water you wanted, king. And David looks at it. He goes, I can't take this, it costs too much. And he pours it on the ground. If I'm the man, I'm like going, what? What are you doing? I did all that and you just waste it? But he understood the power of an offering. So that was what I was preaching. And so the Lord, when I got to the end of the messages, I did this message 5 times. First 3 messages, I took a $100 bill and a trash can in front of me, and I just lit it with a match, just dropped it in the trash and watched it burn. And you could see teenagers, I mean, just, maybe $100 is not much to teenagers today, but back then it seemed like a lot, 20 years ago. And they're just like, he just burned that money. Was it counterfeit? Was it like fake? It's just this one. So then the 4th message, I had this limited edition autograph picture of Roger Staubach that was given to me by my mom for Christmas one year. It was worth a good amount of money. It was also worth a lot sentimental. I got to the end of the message, I just tore the picture up and I just dropped it in the trash can. I hated this sermon. But it was in there. And so I was trying to illustrate the power of sacrifice and cost and what worship is. So the last message, there was this series of books that I read when I was a kid that called The 3 Investigators, and they were pretty collectible. And books 29 through 43 were not released for public sale except through Scholastic in school fairs. And only the hardbacks were in libraries. They couldn't even buy those. They were just in libraries. So I had a couple of those. And they were worth $400 or $500. Very rare, hard to find, and very emotional. So I took that last book, number 43 that I had, and just at the end of that message, I just ripped it up and dropped it, knowing that I'm never going to go back and replace it for the money that it would cost, and it's just a kid's book. This summer, I'm in St. Louis, there for the National Bible Quiz, watching our teams compete for the church. I'm driving to Fitz Root Beer to get a root beer float and a hamburger, and I see a half-price bookstore. Oh, wow. I love half-price bookstore. You never know. I pull in. I go over the collectibles. There's 10 of those books that I tore up 20 years ago, including the last one that I had actually literally torn up. $5 a piece. Somebody at Half Price Bookstore made a big mistake. I bought them all. I got in the car. The Lord said, I didn't forget about your offering. 20 years. I never even give it a second thought after a week. He will not forget the seeds you plant and sow, that he compels you, that respond to need. It is the blessing comes from it. Absolutely. The Lord will not forget. You may be so blessed in so many ways because of offerings you don't even think about anymore. Just listen to the Spirit. Let him talk to you during this season.